8 bikes, 5 different motors, 4,000 watts of power. This is the MBR SL E-Bike of the Year test.
We've got a great lineup. First up is the Orbea Rise LT. Then we've got the Whyte ELtye 150, Norco Fluid VLT. Then what's probably the original SL e-bike, the specialized turbo Levo SL. New kid on the block, Santa Cruz Heckler SL. A bike we've tested before, but with a different spec, the Trek Fuel EXe. Then we've got this bike is a curveball. It's got all the power. It's the Cannondale Moterra SL. And last but not least, the orange Phase EVO LE.
So Al, why have all these bikes got Conti tyres on?
Well, Continental came on board as a sponsor for this test, and we're really grateful because you can't really weigh the bikes, range test them, or truly test their performance unless you have the same tyres on all of the bikes.
So Al, what tyres did you go for?
Well, they got a load of choice, but I went with the Continental Kryptotal, front and rear, in a soft compound with an Enduro casing. And they do 2 widths as well, but we went with the 2.4 inch.
So Al, the tyres are about the only thing these bikes have got in common, right?
Absolutely. We've got 5 different motor systems. We've got different battery capacities, different frame materials, different wheel sizes, different suspension components. I mean, this test it's all over the shop. I mean, the prices aren't even fixed on these bikes.
So where are we going to start?
Why don't we start with the bike with the least range and the least power.
So this is the Trek Fuel EXe. You said it's got the least power and the least range in the test. Yep. So which motor has it got?
So it's on a TQ HPR 50. So that motor, well, it's got 50 Newton meters of torque. It's got a claimed peak power of 320 watts. But you get the metrics on the display here. It's got quite a cool top tube mounted display. When I was doing the range test, I noticed I never really got more than 300 watts out of it. And I don't know how accurate it is, but you definitely notice on this bike that it's kind of undergunned compared to the new generation of SL bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. I wrote that a bit as well, and I found that I couldn't use anything except the top 2 modes. The kind of eco mode was just unusable.
That's because you're lighter and fitter than me. I only ever used number 3,
okay.
The top mode, right? And even then, it doesn't feel like a powerful bike, but that doesn't mean that the system isn't good. Like, there's a couple of things about it that I really like. The motor is super quiet, right? It's super quiet in use, and there's no clatter from it from when you're coasting.
Yeah.
But the flip side of that on this bike is that what you notice all the cables rattling because the bike's so quiet.
Yeah.
And it's also got a really smooth pedaling action. Like, I found it way more natural than the specialized motor that we'll get to later.
Yeah. And another thing about it is it's so compact.
Yeah.
It means that you can actually remove the battery from this, isn't it? The only bike in test.
It is. It's the only bike with a remove, and you need it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's got a 360 watt-hour battery, but like I said, this isn't the smallest battery in test, but it has the worst range.
Yeah.
It got 811 meters of vertical, and I don't know, that's just, when we get to some of the bikes that come later in the test, that's not a lot of range.
So let's move on from the motor. Tell me about the ride and handling of the bike.
So we had this bike on test before, but we had the top end bike and it came with like RockShox suspension. This bike's got pretty basic Fox suspension, which isn't what you expect on like a 7,000 pound plus bike. You got a rhythm fork and you've got a Float X performance shock. And like they're pretty plush, they work really good. You just don't have a lot of fine tuning on the adjustments. But the key thing with this bike is it's got really sort of enduro based handling. The frame's really solid, the rear suspension works really well. It's got 140 mil on the back and 150 in the front, and I think it'd be better with a 160 fork, but I can't see Trek boosting this bike up because they've just brought out the Slash Plus, right?
And they got the rail as well.
Yeah. So it's almost like this bike's kind of pigeonholed into this 29er kind of trail bike with high efficiency on the motor. Well, maybe not high efficiency because the battery doesn't last very long, but good pedaling efficiency. And I think it's just basically, they're not capitalizing on how good the frame is.
Yeah. There's a nice little hop up you can do on the shock though, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And like, so basically it's got like a plastic cover where you'd normally have a low speed compression adjuster. So I think for like 40, 50 pounds, you can buy a kit, tear that off, fit it, and then you basically upgrade your shock from Performance to Performance Elite, and then you'll be able to fine tune the suspension a little bit more. And one thing I'd say about the suspension is, if you run it too soft, the bike can be quite harsh. So you really just want to get it like, I think I ended up running like 28% sag on it, and I think it works really, really good.
So what about the rest of the spec on this bike?
Well, we definitely gave the bike a hop up, upgrading the tires, because the Bontrager tires, not that great. Maybe great for extending your range, but not very good for handling. and it's got non-series 4-piston brakes from Shimano, which are normally okay, but like this bike just seemed to have, like, the rear brakes seemed to have a lot of variability on it. I don't know if the cables got swapped or if there was air in the system, but like that, it needed a bleed straight off the bat. You got a Shimano mix of SLX XT, so you don't get the double downshift that you get with the XT shifter. And like, it's okay spec, but you'll see when we have some of the bikes later in the test, like, this looks like a 6,000 pound bike, not an 8,000 pound bike. And in fact, the current LRP on this bike is 6,000. I've seen shops selling it for under 5.
Okay, so there's some killer deals out there.
There's some killer deals out there. But I'm not getting into the discounted game when it comes to ratings on these bikes. So I gave the Trek Fuel EXe a 6.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, we're starting low.
Well, I told you we were starting at the bottom, right?
Totally.
Okay, and like, I mean, yeah, and the thing is, at 6 grand, that, you know, like, yeah, that rating would probably change, but when we received this bike for review, it was 7,600 pounds, so that's the price I'm sticking to.
Yep, sounds good. Let's move on to the next one.
Cool.
So bike number 2, we've got the new Santa Cruz Vala, right?
Looks like it. It looks like it, doesn't it? It's not the Santa Cruz. It's the Norco Fluid VLT C2.
Okay.
And there's a little bit, I wouldn't say that it's misleading, but like, it's the C2 because it's the carbon frame, but this bike's not actually full carbon.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. Alloy back end, yeah.
Alloy back end, carbon front end, but it still comes in at just under 20 kilos. So it's this bike's 19.9 kilos with these tires fitted.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. So what motor system has this got?
Bosch SX. We've got 3 Bosch SX bikes in this test.
Popular system.
So this is the first one. And again, I mean, everybody knows 55 Newton meters of torque, 600 watts of peak power, right? Like if you rev like a, how would you say that? Like a hamster in a wheel? I don't know, like if you spin like a hamster, you get 600 watts of peak power. Integrated battery, 400 watt hour battery.
Yep.
So
range extender compatibility.
It is. Range extender compatibility in this bike's not as good as some of the bikes we're going to see later, because again, it's up down to a bit like the Vala we talked about. The range extender sits high. It's compatible with it, and you probably need it too, because this bike got 860 meters of vertical. It actually wasn't this bike, it was a Whyte I tested, but they got the same system, so the range will be the same.
So yeah, for bigger rides, you're probably going to want that range extender, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this bike, it's kind of, it really, like in terms of ride quality and position, it really reminds me of the Specialized Turbo Levo SL, because it's an MX wheel bike, it's got really short chain stays, so when you're climbing, you kind of got that, you got to keep, it feels a bit like, actually, to be honest, it feels a bit like riding a normal bike, so you got to keep your weight forward to keep the nose down, it's got quite a slack head angle. And it really feels like a bike that's sort of not been designed for going up like steep techie climbs, but just basically riding up fire roads and riding good trails on.
Okay.
So it's actually a really fun bike.
So it sounds, well, I mean, if the Norco's from Canada, it sounds like a sort of Canadian Enduro bike, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, totally. I mean, but like you hit something, you hit a really key point in this bike. So it's got 150mm travel and 140 on the rear, but it's actually a really solid bike. Like, look at the size of that. Like that yoke, that suspension link and the rear end and stuff, it's just built tough. And I'd actually like to have had more travel on it.
Yep.
I thought 140 wasn't enough on the rear. I'd like to see this bike being 160 on the front, 150 on the rear, just hitting that kind of do-it-all sweet spot. And the other thing I'd really like from Norco is they've got this ride-a-line system where you go in, you put your weight in, you put your, what kind of, there's a sliding scale for how you want the travel to feel, what kind of trails you're riding. And I'm not joking, Danny. I thought the settings that came out of it were junk. I'm serious. Like, serious. I started off with I said, hey, look, got to give it a go. You got to try it, right? Punched in my weight, punched in the frame size, punched in everything else, the model. Did all the settings on because it's got a really good shock on this bike. It's got a Float X2, Did all the adjustments, rode it, and I was like, this bike feels stiff and kind of harsh, like a full-powered e-bike, but without the power and without the range. And it made the bike feel heavy, because the bike just felt kind of glued to the ground. So the dynamic geometry was really, really stable. But when you wanted to pick it up and move it or do something like this, it was like, it felt like
there was just way too much damping.
Yeah, it felt like a lump. So I just basically started.
Took all the damping off.
Took damping of the fork, damping of the shock, and then the bike came to life. But that's not, I mean, and that's not a fault, right? It just means that, like, when you've got a complex shock like that, it's really good to have a starting point, but I thought their starting point was way too at one extreme. And it's almost kind of neither here nor there, because This bike actually came with Continental tires,
Yep.
but not these ones.
Yep.
It came with the Endurance compound, and I'm not joking, Danny. I was like, there just was no traction, no confidence. And again, I get what they're trying to do. They're probably trying to eke the life
Yep.
out of the battery to get you the maximum range. But when a bike's got good geometry like this, good handling and good suspension, you want good tires. And the other thing you need is good brakes. And the TRPs weren't very good.
So yeah, I mean, they could have fitted a 200 mil rotor at the back,
Exactly,
right?
and that's one of the first things you're going to want to do to this bike, yeah? But the other thing was, I noticed, like, the lever feels really nice, the modulation's good, but on longer runs, the brakes fade.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think for my weight at 85 kilos, I want 200 front and rear. And if you're like a heavier guy on this bike, you know, or girl,
Yep.
you're going to want 220 mil rotors front and rear just to get the maximum power out of these brakes.
Okay, so we've already found quite a few things that could be improved on this bike.
Absolutely. And that's the fundamental reason why I gave it a 7.
Okay.
Because when the category is so competitive, you can't fit the wrong tires and you can't fit the wrong brakes to a bike.
Yeah.
Even though I really liked how this bike rode.
We didn't actually talk about the price, did we?
$8 grand.
Okay, so it's pretty spendy.
Yeah, they're all pretty spendy. Like, okay, so Danny, it's $8 grand today.
Yeah.
If you're watching this video, I have no idea how much it's going to be tomorrow. Well, it's true, right?
It is, you're right,
Yeah.
100%. Cool, so you've got a good motor, you've got a really good frame, the geometry's everything's sorted, but a few little things they need to work on with the spec.
Absolutely.
And
And they need to
maybe
get the settings sorted too.
Recommended settings,
Yeah.
especially if you're going to have that tool for people, you want to get it right.
And
don't
it's a
you?
great
So,
tool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is pretty detailed, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Cool, let's move on to the next bike.
Yeah.
So Al, the Turbo Levo SL, you said this is quite similar to the Norco in some ways.
In a lot of ways actually. MX wheels, short rear end in the short chainstay setting, and it's kind of got that playful character to it where it's kind of not, how do I say, it's not really designed as, it's not really designed for climbing.
Yeah.
It's really just designed for going up like fire roads and stuff and then like blasting down like really cool tracks.
Yeah.
So it's a really fun bike.
Yeah, yeah, I'd agree. I've ridden it a lot, and it's yeah, it's hilarious.
So this one is the Expert Carbon, and again, we're going to get into this price thing. This is messed up, right? So the 2024 bike, which is this one, is currently 7.5 grand.
Yeah.
But it was 9 grand when they sent it to review.
Yeah.
And the 2025 one, which is essentially the same bike but with a Genie shock fitted to it, is 9 grand.
Okay, that's a lot of money for a shock.
It's a lot of money for a shock, yeah. And it ain't worth it, right? I mean, it's a great shock, and I think it makes a really big, the Genie technology, which is this kind of like dual stage air spring, progressive air spring, it has a really big benefit on an analog bike. Whether that comes to an e-bike, I'm not so sure, but like it's definitely, I'm not going to spend 1,500 quid for it.
Yeah, well, I guess this is a fairly kind of low-powered e-bike, isn't it? I mean, what are the numbers with the specialized motor?
So
and
this is the SL 1.2 motor, right? So they increased the numbers. This bike's got 50 Newton meters of torque, and it's got a peak power output of 320 watts.
Yeah.
But the thing with this bike, it only comes with a 320 watt-hour battery.
Yeah.
It's tiny, right? But it doesn't have the worst range. That's still the Trek, right? Like the Trek's still got the worst range. This bike sits in between the Bosch SX with a 400 and the Trek with a 360. And this one's only got a 320, but its range is in between those two. And it's got more, when you compare it to the Trek, although it's got 50 Newton meters of torque and similar power output on paper, the bike feels more punchy.
So that's, I mean, it sounds quite impressive then again.
It is impressive, and because I think it's got good efficiency.
Yeah.
I think that it's got to be efficiency gains that are doing it, right? Or maybe some of those other motors aren't so efficient. It could just be that, right? But the most impressive thing about this bike, Danny, is that it weighs 18.4 kilos.
So it's actually pretty much an SL e-bike.
It is a genuine SL. It is the lightest bike on test, and by a mile. Not only is it the lightest bike on test, but you could actually stick the 1 kilo range extender on this bike, which is 160 watts, and increase the range by 50%, and it would still be the lightest bike on test.
Okay, so it's, yeah, I mean, that's throwing some interesting kind of permutations there.
It is. I mean, it's like, so if you're focused on weight, this is the bike to get.
Yeah.
Like it is, right? Because it's light, and like that range would be really good with the range extender. But it's a 9 gram bike. It doesn't have a lot of punch,
Yeah.
right? Compared to some of the bikes we're going to get to later, they've got similar range that this will have with the range extender, but way more power.
Yeah, it's a real subtle system, isn't it?
It is a subtle system, and it's a bit surgy. I actually think the TQ motor had a better pedaling dynamic than the Specialized motor. So it's kind of like if you come from an analog bike and you got on this thing, it'd blow your mind.
Yeah.
Like it really would, right? It's got good suspension, it's got good handling, it's got Fox Performance Elite level suspension, so you can tune the low speed, you can tune the high and low speed on the fork, you can tune the low speed on the shock. You can really get the bike set up how you want it. It's got crazy geometry adjust.
Yeah, yeah. What is it, 12 different options or something?
I lost count. I think this one might have more actually, because it's got plus or minus 1 on the head angle with the drop-in cup, which is super easy to fit. It's got an asymmetric flip chip in the shock yoke for BB height and head angle. And it's got, they're calling it wheel size now, but it's basically got chainstay and BB height on the back. So if you wanted to make this bike better at climbing, in the current setup, it's short because it's got the 27.5 rear wheel. You'd probably put it in the long setting and just kind of get your weight forward a little, longer chain stays. You could slacken the head angle out if you want to just bomb descents. And what's really interesting, Danny, about this bike is, although it's the lightest bike on test, Specialized has really nailed the kind of stiffness to flex on it. It's not flimsy.
Yeah.
Like there's a bike we're going to get to in a bit later, which is a really good bike, but it's really flexy.
But nor is it harsh either.
No, it's like the thing is, what I found frustrating with this bike is that if you can put the range extender on it and it's still the lightest bike on test, why didn't they give the motor more power?
Yeah.
Maybe they can't.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's still an SL bike. It's still an SL bike that everybody's bikes are going to compare to. But I think with this new generation of SL bikes, people want it all.
It's true. I mean, this SL E-bikes have been going for quite a while now. Haven't quite have taken off, maybe as anticipated. Maybe, everything's meeting in the middle again.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, the funny story is that people have been asking me for years what I thought of the SL market. I spent some time with Specialized this year, and that's the first time they've asked me what I thought about the SL market, because no one knows where it's going, right? And I think basically it's going full power, lightweight. And this bike's lightweight, but sure as hell ain't full power.
No. So we haven't talked about the rating. What did it get?
No, I gave it a 7 because it's a little bit expensive. It's got better spec than the Norco, similar ride quality to the Norco, so they kind of meet in the middle on a 7. And we're going to go from the lightest bike on test to the heaviest bike on test.
All right, let's go. So you said this is the heaviest bike. How much does it weigh?
20.82 kilos.
Okay.
So there's some 8 grand full power bikes that aren't much heavier than that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess it's an alloy bike though, isn't it?
It is. And in fact, when you say it's an alloy bike, it's an alloy bike, right? There's not a single carbon component on it. Even the bash guard on the Bosch SX motor is aluminium made in Halifax.
Cool. Right, so if it's not a carbon bike, are we getting any kind of savings here, financial savings?
0.
All right.
This bike's 8 grand.
Okay.
Yeah. So I should probably, maybe we should have said this at the very beginning of the test. The target price point was 8K.
But in fairness, it has got a load of Kashima Fox factory stuff on it, isn't it?
Kashima fork, Kashima shock, Kashima seat post. Yeah, totally. So Danny, I'm not saying that like having a frame made in the UK of aluminium is cheaper than having one a carbon frame made in Asia. But like they've definitely taken that, they've put money into the suspension for sure. So you've got factory level Float X2 shock and you've got a 36 grip 2 fork.
So has that investment paid off?
Yeah, the suspension is really good on this bike. I mean, you've got 160 mil travel front and rear. And I know there's people gonna be watching this video going, oh, it's just a single pivot, single pivots are shit and stuff, but it's just nonsense, right? You can have good single pivots, you can have bad 4 bars, and you can have really shit 6 bars. It doesn't mean, it's not to be on an alloy suspension. And Orange has done something really cool with this bike. So it's got that yoke, and it's got a trunnion mount at the front, and then they've dropped bearings in at the back. So like the breakaway force is like really low on it. So the bike's got really good traction. Like,
that's really good.
I like riding it.
Yeah. And they've also, over the years, they kind of tilted the shock down.
Yeah, they tilted the shock down to make it a little bit. The bike's still pretty linear, and it's still got a low dynamic ride height. So even though it's not got a crazy low BB, you got to remember it's got 160 mil of travel and it rides low. And And like, it's got a real nice feel to it. Like they do. I don't know if it's the way they press and crease the aluminium or it's just the amount of material that's in it, but it's got a real nice feel to it. And the way the suspension behaves in terms of like, it's got good quality suspension. It's got really laid out, like long laid out. This is a big bike, right? You can absolutely charge on it, but because you've got the top end suspension components, you can still pick a bike up, you can move it around, you can put it where you want it. But I rolled the bars back a little bit on it just to kill off some of the reach because it's a big old bike.
So I can see they've done some other quirky things as well here.
Yeah, so they've got a little safe storage box here where you cut a hole in the downshift. Now, I don't know how safe that is, right? Like, I wouldn't cut a hole right there. But, and like, to be fair, I think it's kind of pointless because the battery sits like up to here. It's got a 400 watt hour battery because it's on the Bosch SX system. So there's not much space in there.
It's a little tissue box.
It is a little, you can keep a hanky in there, but like there's nothing you couldn't do with the tool strap, right?
Yep.
And then you wouldn't have to worry about a hole in your down tube right behind your head tube, right? I'm not saying that's a problem. I'm just saying that's like, I'd be uncomfortable with it. They've also done this thing where they've put the charging port right up top, which I think is pretty cool because for a lot of people, you go into your workshop or okay, let's say you're charging it in your kitchen, right? Where are your plugs?
Yeah.
They're here.
Yeah, yeah.
So you just run the lead straight over there. Exactly. You know, what's the last thing you want to do after you've been out hammering this thing for an hour and a half in turbo? Your back's hurting, you're aching. You don't want to try and fish around down there and get the mud off to get the charging port in. I really like that.
So one knock-on effect of that though is that they've lost the top tube controller and they've had to put this
the
big
Puron
old
200 display. And like, you know, Danny, I'm not a fan of this. I'd prefer to have it in the top tube or hidden behind, like the Shimano, hidden behind the handlebar. But what's kind of interesting feature in this is that, well, you've got loads of metrics, but it actually tells you when to change gear.
Yep.
And you and I both know from riding the Bosch system, you got to rev it to get their claimed 600 watts of peak power. You've got to, is it 120 RPM?
120, yeah.
Yeah, the cadence is ridiculous, right? This thing tells you to change gear to keep you in a high cadence. And I really like that because if someone's got on this bike and they didn't know that the Bosch system needs to be spun, the controller's telling you change gear, change gear, change gear. And I think that's really cool. But like I said, you turn it over, take the wheels out, you're going to scratch it. I'd way rather have like a behind the handlebar or embedded in the top tube. And there's another disadvantage, Danny, of having your charging port on your top tube. Is that your kind of range extender has to go under here if you want to put one in. You've got to have this cable that comes up over the top, which it's not very neat. And you're going to see, we've seen the Specialized already. Range extender sits super low. We're going to see another bike later, the Whyte. They put it in exactly the same place. It's, you know, Orange can't do that because they're kind of wedded to their suspension design.
So if we go back to the weight, did the fact that it's the heaviest bike in test and this is supposed to be an SL E-Bike test, did that negatively affect the handling or the performance of the bike?
I hate to break it to you, Danny, but no, not at all.
Okay.
Like it's not,
so are we chasing like a dream?
I don't know. I think
exist?
it's like, so listen, so we went from the lightest bike at what was 18.4 to the heaviest bike at 20.8, roughly, right? Most of the bikes in this test are 19.5 to 19.8, right? So the weight difference they're not as big as everybody thinks they are because we've talked about this loads of time before. This is a 160 mil travel enduro bike.
Yep.
Enduro bikes weigh between 16 to 17 kilos. Bolt the e-bike stuff on and you're at 21 kilos. There's no getting around it.
Yeah. So what didn't you like about it?
The SLX brakes.
Okay.
They just felt like on a bike that's this capable, even though they're 4-piston, I felt undergunned on it. They got big rotors. It's just like the brakes, they squealed a lot. The pads seem to do this thing where like obviously I got 8 bikes to rotate through on this test. So I wasn't riding this bike every day. It might sit in the shed for like 2 weeks. By the time I got back to it again, and the pads would glaze over. So you'd go out, you hit a corner and you'd kill yourself.
Yeah, I've noticed that with Shimano brakes.
Yeah,
weird, isn't
so like I think that for me is like I'm not into the display, I'm not into the brakes, and also the Fox factory dropper post, although it's nice to have and looks cool with all the other stuff, after like 2 or 3 rides, I was having to pull it out.
Yeah.
I tried doing the seat collar, I tried doing the cable tension. It's just temperamental. So there's going to be a lot of people looking at this bike, and they're going to see a couple of bikes that are coming, and they're going to think it's too expensive, and I'd agree.
Okay. So what was the rating?
7 again.
Okay.
So that's the third and last 7 in the test.
All right, let's move on to the 8s then.
Yep.
So moving on up, we've got the first of our Shimano bikes, right?
Yeah.
Orbea Rise LT.
Yeah, this is the LT, so you're looking at 160mm fork and 150mm in the rear.
And it's pretty cool because this bike, you can configure it kind of how you want. 2 different battery options, right?
Yeah, battery options, tire options, rotor options. You go on the website, there's a ton of options, right? But the key one is, because it's an SL E-bike, is that you can either run it with we've got it with a 420 watt-hour battery, but there's also a 630 watt-hour battery option available. You can just choose it at checkout. And there's a 210 watt-hour range extender that goes right in the bulk cage.
Yeah, it's really cool. So and it's a full power bike, right? It's a full power motor with a smaller battery, but you can have a bigger battery. So
what's interesting about this bike is, yep, it's a Shimano EP801 motor with their RS tune on it. So it is a full powered motor, and it delivers. You can have two settings. You can have RS or RS plus. You can have toned down, or you can have full power. I think the toned down settings just not worth having, right?
Yep.
So basically, because you can configure it just to have like trail modes, multiple trail modes with different power settings. Yep. So you just sit in one mode and choose the setting you want. But what blew me away about this bike was that it actually had like the 3rd best range in test.
Okay.
It got over 900 meters of vertical. So it got 100 over the bikes we've had before, but yet it's still in that kind of 19.5 kilo kind of weight bracket. So I was really impressed with that. Like it's pretty light. It's got the power you need, and where that really comes into play is it allows you to go into different terrain. Like on the test loop that we were doing for the range test, there's this kind of chunky, rocky climb you're going up. And like on the trek, I ran out of gears.
Okay.
Because I didn't have the power, right? Whereas this bike, yeah, I'm all the way up to cassette, but because I'm getting like 600 watts out of it, not 3, I can get up the climb. So like I've heard someone say that the full power motors make mountain biking 3-dimensional, and I think that's what this is bringing to the market.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really good kind of mix of the lightweight system, and then yeah, like you say, the full power just brings another level.
And you can tune it down with the controller here. Like you can just choose your modes, right, and just turn it down. So if you want to get longer range from it, you can do that. Or if you want longer range, you can get the bigger battery. Or if you want to ride it in turbo all the time, you get the bigger battery too. But it'll still almost do 1,000 meters of vertical with the small battery. So the handling feels really good on it. But it's not quite perfect.
Okay. Talk me through what you don't like about it.
Okay. Well, the first thing I don't like is I do not like not having some kind of battery indicator. Yep. Because
I'd agree.
Everyone that's ridden this bike's gone, what battery it's got in it? Yep. And I'm like, when we first got it, I was like, I think it's the 420. It's light enough to be the 420. And then like you're riding, and the whole time you're like, all you get on this is you get a light that it's on, and then it goes red when the battery's about to run out, and that's panic stations, right? So I don't like that.
You've got to keep checking your app basically on the phone. Or if you've got a Garmin, you can link it to your Garmin.
You can link your Garmin, or you can actually select the Shimano display at checkout and add it. So that'd be one thing I'd do for that bike. The other thing that I wasn't crazy about was the suspension feel. So this bike has the 36 fork with the latest Grip X damper in it. So like all the other Fox bikes in this test still have the Grip 2, the older one, and this has got the new damper in it. And I think the dampen's too heavy-handed.
Yep.
You went to the launch, right?
I went to the launch. I've ridden a lot of forks with that new damper on, and I've had the same experience on all of them. Basically, run as little damping as possible.
Everything wide open.
Wide open.
Yeah, totally. And even then, because when I got on this bike, you've been riding it before me. I got on it, and I was riding some trails I know really well, and I never get hand pain or arm pump or anything like that. And I could just feel this pressure, this constant. I was like, why are my hands aching? And then I looked down, and I was, oh, it's not a 36 Grip 2, it's a Grip X. And that's not the only thing I didn't like about the fork, is the fork doesn't balance the rear suspension. The rear suspension kind of feels more linear, more active, and the fork kind of sits up. So the fork kind of pivots, or the bike kind of pivots around the front axle. So you kind of got like a disconnect front and rear of the suspension. And I also think the frame's too flexy.
Yep, it's certainly, you notice that.
Yeah.
Obviously there's no seat stay bridge there, you've got the split pivot, kind of thin split pivot.
And they kind of haven't sort of like, so when Specialized did that originally to try and get the shorter back ends, they beefed everything else up around it. And I know when Vitas did it, they put double complement bearings in the back because you have to compensate for the fact there's no seat stay bridge. This bike just feels, and it's a 29er too, so you've got the big 29er wheels just going wop, wop, wop like this. And it's really cool when you're riding kind of techy, rooty, lower speed stuff, because the bike sort of seems to just kind of navigate its own way through it and doesn't sort of snap around. But you take it to somewhere where you're kind of loading into more like G-force turns, bermy stuff, faster stuff, and a big guy will just twist this bike.
Yeah, and when I took the back end apart, I noticed that the paint had been rubbing on the kind of axles, so the seat stays and the chain stays,
Yeah.
and the drop
and the
out
tire
had been
rubs on
rubbing.
the inside of the frame too.
Yep.
So this bike could have been the winning bike in the test. Like look, I mean, look at it.
Can I point out something I really hate about this bike?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, please do. I remember it because I didn't have to do it. That's why I forgot about it. Yeah, go ahead.
So the headset cable routine is a nightmare.
Absolutely.
Like, the front end was really started to creak after I was riding it. So I went in to re-grease the bearings, and it took me like 2 hours to get everything apart and put it all back together again. I was just like about to throw the bike over
You
the
know, the
hedge.
funniest thing about it, Danny, is that 2 rides later, it did it again. Right? And I'm like, I'm not taking it apart. I'd rather put earplugs in than take that thing apart to fix it. So it could have been, like, if you look at this bike compared to the orange that just came before it, like, this bike's lighter, it's full carbon, it has arguably a better spec because it's got XT brakes and some other bits that are like upgraded over the orange. It's a really well spec bike. And the bike's, like with this build, we've got a couple of little mods on it, but with this build, you're looking at about like 7, 8. Like, so it's a little bit cheaper. It's not a cheap bike by any means, and it looks amazing, right? But I just don't think they've nailed the ride quality. I'd like to see a fork that's either more linear or a shock that's more supportive and progressive, so at least it feels balanced. And I would not recommend this bike to anyone that's over 95 kilos.
Yeah, I would probably agree
It's just
with
too
that.
flexy. But the range and the power and the handling in certain conditions is really good. So like I gave it an 8. It's a good bike. It definitely is a step up in terms of range, power, and like where you can go on it compared to the other SL bikes we've had previously in this test that we've seen earlier. But you're not really paying a penalty for it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed riding it. I think with a different damper in the fork, probably I would have happily ride that. Yeah. And then I would have to spend a fortune taking it to a shop to get it serviced.
To deal with that, yeah.
So no, it's a cool bike.
It's a really cool bike. And you know, and I got to give props to Orbea because now I don't know if it was foresight or just good fortune, but they backed the full power motor, detuned full power motor from the very beginning. And I think they did it because to develop your own motor, or there weren't any other motors in the market that you could kind of just bolt on. They didn't really have any choice, but it's paid off because you'll see some other bikes that are coming out. It's kind of where it's at. Yeah.
Well, let's go to another one of those.
Let's go straight to another Shimano bike.
So come on, you're trying to slide this one past us, right? This is just a full power e-bike, yeah?
I think Cannondale's trying to slide it past everyone, right? To be fair, Danny, this is called the Moterra SL. So it's an SL bike. Cannondale call it an SL bike, but it is a full power bike, right? It's got a Shimano EP801 motor, full power, 85 Newton meters of torque, 600 watts peak power, and it's got a 600 watt hour battery in the downshift.
So the full package, yeah, so how much does it weigh then?
20.44 kilos.
That's pretty good.
It is pretty good, Danny, because it's also got the best range in test.
Okay, hit me with it.
It did 1,215 meters of vertical compared to what we were talking earlier.
Really
a lot
good.
of those bikes are in the 800 range.
And that's in boost mode, right?
I did them all in boost mode.
Yep.
So that means like not only did I go much further, I went faster. It was great, right? It was so cool. Like it kind of makes a bit of a mockery of like the whole SL thing because it's not that much heavier, but like you've got all the power.
Sounds like you know, best of both worlds, isn't it?
Wouldn't go that far, right? I wouldn't quite go that far. So this bike you're looking at here is the Moterra SL1, and it costs like, it's 8,550 pounds. It's kind of like 50 pounds here or there. It's like 8.5 grand, right? You're getting full Fox factory Kashima again, front and rear. You got 160 mil travel in the front. You got 150 mil in the rear, and you got MX wheels, right? But you've also got 453 mil chainstays. So this bike was actually designed as a 29er.
Okay.
They haven't said that, but like it's got to be, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't build it as a dedicated MX bike and have that long a chainstay. So you can use the flip chip and plug this. You can make this full 29 or MX. So you got both, right?
Right, so you can have both, but how do they make it so light then?
Well, they've used some technology from their cross-country bike. So they've got this flex pivot rear end, which has got flex stays at the bottom. So what's really cool about this is that most flex stay bikes are single pivots with a seat stay assembly flex.
Yep.
This bike's actually got flex on the chainstay where you'd have a horse link pivot,
Yep.
so it's still a 4-bar.
Okay.
Right? So the suspension is pretty good on it, and basically what you're doing is you're eliminating a couple of pivots, a couple of bearings, a bit of hardware, you're getting the weight down. Like, realistically,
100 grams, 200 grams?
if you save 200 grams, right, I don't think it's worth it.
That overall bike weight, that light weight, must come from somewhere else then as well.
Well, it's got quite a high spec. It's got quite light wheels, and the carbon. It's got to be high-end carbon, right?
Yep.
It's high modulus carbon. The frame itself's got to be pretty light.
Yep.
But my problem with this bike is that much as I loved razzing around on it at full speed, and I loved all the technical climbs I could do, because the other thing you've got with this motor, because it's a full power motor, you've got proper overrun.
Yep.
So this bike's actually got I got this firmware updated on this bike, so it's got the extended overrun and the extra support. So like, it's got loads of power, it's got loads of overrun. You basically rally up, rally down, rally everywhere, yeah? But it has limitations, and that's why it's another 8 bike, it's not a 9, right? That rear suspension, those flex pivots, they require preload to get them to move. So while the suspension actually feels quite good when you're in the bike, when you're in the travel, when you're outside, as soon as you hit the brakes or go light, there's extra force needed to get the rear wheel moving, and the bike kind of like, on some steep, sketchy stuff, the bike felt a bit like a ski.
Okay.
Now, we've got the same tires on all the bikes, so I know it's not tire traction was the problem, it's the rear suspension.
Okay.
Like, and it's funny, I went out, so in my range test video, you'll hear me moan about the rattle coming out of this bike. It was hideous, right? I thought it was the battery rattling in the down tube, but we spent a day swapping wheels, swapping forks, swapping headsets, took the battery out, took the motor out. Spent a whole day with Graham from Cannondale. He was a saint for coming and like doing that. And it turned out it was actually the headset that was the top part of the adjustable headset that wasn't sitting quite right or had been damaged, because this bike had been somewhere before it got to us. So basically that's what the knocking was. But even when we got that resolved, I'd be riding the Cannondale, and much as I really enjoyed the rush of that kind of like the power and the speed, there was something about the rear suspension the whole time when we were riding like the kind of terrain you want to ride on a bike with a 63-degree head angle. This is, again, it's got a long chain, but it needs to be that slack, Danny, because
balance it out.
Yeah, I rode it in the steep setting when it first arrived, and I think someone had been playing around with the headset before that's why I got damaged. So I rode it in the steep setting, and I didn't like the weight distribution. As soon as we opened up the head angle to like 63 degrees, I was like, whoa, yeah, this is where it's at. You feel really centered on the bike. And the other part of the kind of puzzle that plays into is that when you're in those steep, sketchy trails where you feel like you haven't got enough traction, you kind of want the front wheel as far away from you as possible for safety. And again, a bit like the Orbea, this could have been like this is so close to being the package.
Right.
Right, you've
and
got
that's
the
just
power.
That rear suspension, do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the bit that nailed it for me. And there was one other thing that like scared the living daylights out of me. The Magura MT5 brakes.
Yeah, I mean, when I rode this bike when I first picked it up, it had no brakes at all.
Well, it did have brakes, Danny. There were brakes on the bike, right?
They were bolted on,
They were bolted on.
But they may as well,
non-functional. Non-functional, right? Yeah, totally. So we changed the pads, we changed the rotors. That improved it. But then I was testing at the Forest of Dean. I came into this track which is kind of pumpy and jumpy, and it gets into a bit of chop. And what happened then, and it never happened to me before, was that, you know, these brake levers have got this kind of like breakaway thing where the lever goes like that. It actually flicked out from under my finger. So I had no rear brake for like a split second, and then I was searching for it. Yeah, I was death gripping, and I was searching for it, and I'm not joking, my heart rate soared, right? So not only, and then basically when we did the shoot again, we went on the photo shoot, the brakes weren't working again. Like it took half your ride for them to bed in. So it needs better brakes, and it needs some tweaking. Like I think that flex stay suspension's got potential. I just think the execution needs, I mean, you can feel it when you push on this, when the bike's like this and you push on the saddle, you can feel it's a bit firm to get going. It's just like, if that was to disappear, then this bike could be the one.
And obviously even with the headset not making a noise, you still got a little bit of rattle from the motor.
Yeah, you have rattle from the
Yep.
motor. I mean, and also, you know, Shimano EP801 motors, there's been talk about them not being as reliable as previous generations. This, like, this
That
bike
bike's
was
still working fine.
it is working fine, but it made some crazy noises on the range test. Like seriously, once you got up the cassette, so it's
Yep.
got like, you know, it's got T-type transmission.
Yeah.
And I should touch on that really, because I've moaned about T-type being too slow on full power bikes, but this is a full power bike. I don't know if SRAM's changed something, but it just, or maybe I've just got used to it, right? Because the majority of bikes I ride now have T-type, so I'm conditioned to it, but it didn't really bug me this time.
Yeah. Okay.
And I like the fact that when you've got all the power, and you've got like, you can take this bike on to steep techie stuff like, well, it's a full powered e-bike, right? That when you need to shift, like it's secure and it's safe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, the shift's super good under load, isn't it? So that's our second bike with an 8 rating. What are we moving on to now?
Another 8.
So Santa Cruz Heckler SL. It's a pretty bike. I know that it was one of your top contenders, right?
One of my favorites.
Yeah, and I loved riding it as well.
Just fun, right? It's I'd say if we were just basing the test on fun alone, this would be the winner.
Yeah, yeah.
It's really good fun bike.
It's great, isn't it? And first bike we've had on test so far with a Fazua motor, yeah?
Yep, Ride 60 system, so 60 Newton meters of torque, 430 watt-hour battery, and the peak power in that boost mode goes to 450.
Yep.
But I think really you're like just in normal, what's it called, rocket mode? They got stupid names for them. Like, what was it, Breeze,
Rocket,
River?
Yeah.
Sound like a bunch of 70s
Wind.
born children, right? So that's more like 350 watts.
It is, yeah.
So it's definitely in the what we'd call mid-power, low-power kind of setup. But what's really interesting with this bike, Danny, is that it almost matched the Cannondale on range. It did like 1,202 meters of vertical.
Well, we know from previous range tests, it's really efficient, isn't it? It's really good.
Smokes every other genuine lightweight kind of setup on the market for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's a big deal.
It is a big deal.
Why do you want to go home early? No one does, do they?
Or Danny, for me, like, why do you want to ride around eco mode? Like, just extending the pain. Like, I just want to go out and razz around and have fun, right? I mean, because e-bikes are for different people. Different people want to do different things on them. And I think what's really cool about this bike is it's really got a party vibe about it.
Yep.
It's got MX wheels. It's got 160 mil travel fork, 150 mil travel rear. And I mean, like, just keeping the front down. All you want to do is pop the front, manual it, flick the back end around. And the bike's got this kind of, I wouldn't say it's got the best suspension in test. It's got a really good kind of, you can really spring off it. It's got loads of support and the bike's quite stiff. So you can just smash it into stuff.
Yeah.
Like, it's fun, isn't it? Like, it's a really fun bike.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah. The first time I went on it, I was like, I can see why you're so into it.
Yeah, I really like, and I like the system too, right? Because so when you can get 1,200 meters of vertical out of a bike without a range extender on, out of the box, that's pretty cool, right?
Which is lucky because they haven't got a range extender.
Yeah, totally. But do you know what I'm saying? So I was going to say the motor's quiet. Some of the motors are quiet. Some of the Fazua motor. This one isn't. This one's making some horrendous noises.
Yeah, and by that you mean when the motor is actually in operation.
When I'm using the motor, it's making a lot of crunchy. Like sounds like it could explode. Which
I guess leads us into the sort of Achilles heel potentially of this system is reliability. Yeah.
The bike that we tested before was a Pivot Shuttle SL.
Yep.
I know they had reliability issues with the motor. I know Santa Cruz has had reliability issues with the motor. I mean, it's just doesn't seem to be a very robust system. And I'm not talking about the little kind of like flimsy ring controller. I'm just talking about like the system in general. Yeah, we also had a Lapierre on test and that motor went pop as well. So yeah, when it's working, it's brilliant. Exactly. And that's what, like, much as I love this bike, like I really love riding it. I really like the system. I love how it feels. It just makes me go out and have I just want to have a good time. There's the reliability issue. And also I think this bike was 7,600 in this build. And I think for that kind of money, just like the older code brakes. Just the brakes aren't good enough. There's a few things about the specification, like the brakes, they're just not good enough.
Yep.
You know, not when you've got the Orbea is pretty much the same price, and look at the difference in the specification.
Yeah,
it's night and day.
It is. It is.
You know, so but I mean, I got to place my heart for it. So I like it, right? It's a really cool
that's
bike.
it. You swing a leg over it and immediately you're one over again, aren't you? So
yeah. The geometry is really good. Like the proportions on this bike, so this is a large. It's got like around about 475 reach, so like 475, 480. It's got a really good sizing on it. It's got a nice high front end. It's got a pretty tight back end, and also all the sizes have got proportional chainstays. So proportional rear standards, because the chainstays are all the same. And what's cool about it, because the Fazua system is quite compact, Santa Cruz can still use its VPP suspension. Yeah. Whereas we've seen, like we mentioned, we joked earlier about the Norco being the Vala, right? But like the reason why they moved from that system is because they moved their suspension systems, because they can't package it around the big motors.
Bulky motor,
whereas they still can with this.
Yeah, totally.
So
yeah, I mean, I think you know, ultimately, e-bikes are toys, aren't they? So you want to jump on them, and you want to feel
all
good.
bikes are toys.
Like you're having a blast.
Exactly. And the thing is, in terms of the blast factor, it's super high on this bike. It's just not good enough to put it into a position where it challenges the best bike in this test.
Well, I think that leads us on nicely to the winner.
Let's roll with that.
The winning bike.
Yep.
The Whyte ELtye 150 RSX.
Oh, good to see you can read the name off the back of the seat, Danny.
I can remember all that.
It's great to have you along. Yeah, I mean, so I rode the Works bike when at launch, and I was blown away. But you rode it too. What blew you away about it?
Two things. Number one, the rear suspension, amazing.
Yeah.
Number two, chuck the range extender on it. Handling is identical.
Exactly. They nailed it, right? They absolutely nailed it. I mean, and I got exactly the same impression from it. And so this bike is the 8,000 pound bike, so it's $2,000 cheaper than the top end bike. Exactly the same frame though, full carbon frame and with adjustable geometry. But the key thing that they've done that I think is amazing is they put the charging port right on the front here.
Yep.
So when you do bolt in that 250 watt-hour PowerMore range extender from Bosch, there's a really little short cable.
Yeah.
So like
super neat.
Super neat, and you don't have to choose between all the other bikes. It's bottle cage range extender, bottle cage range extender. This one, you go slap range extender, boom, fid lock, magnetic thing, plump, click in a water bottle. So you got both.
That's
I mean,
brilliant.
how cool is that, right?
That's brilliant.
And then
that's the way it should be, right? Really.
But the thing is, Danny, but then every bike would have to look like a Specialized.
Well, we've done this before, haven't we?
Yeah. I mean, they would do, right?
It's
I mean,
so
and to be fair, like Whyte's taken what kind of like Specialized led the way with that layout, and Whyte's taken it and evolved it, right?
Yeah.
So it's really, really cool. And you're right about the rear suspension, right? So this bike's only got 140 mil in the rear. It's got 150 up front. I think it's the only bike in test where you feel the damping working. Right, so a lot of bikes, when you hit bumps, the wheel moves, right? And it kind of goes up and down and goes over and you keep going forward. But then when the suspension works really well, the shock absorbs energy from the impacts, it doesn't just allow the wheel to move, it takes energy out of the system. This bike does that amazingly.
Well, that's good to hear, because obviously the bike I rode and you rode originally was the higher spec. It had a different shock on there, didn't it?
It had a piggyback shock. So this is the only bike in test with an inline shock.
So it's really good to hear that even though it's got that downgrade, the suspension works as well.
Yeah, it does. I mean, they've done a great job tuning this shock to get exactly how they want it. And like they've sweated the details with the GO2. It's a full 29er. Again, it's got like 453 chainstays, so it's got a long chainstay like the Cannondale. The reach is good. Like in the past, you would have said Whyte's geometry was like super progressive and stuff. The geometry is just the same as everybody else's, right? They're all the same, right? But what I like on this bike, and I'm not always a fan of like the super short stems, but because you got the long chainstay and it's an e-bike, I like the short stem because it allows me to get my weight back. And it's not that I want my weight back, it just puts me in the right place. So I felt like, I mean, I remember one day we were out in Redlands and you were on a bike that was making a hell of a lot of noise. This bike is
that was the Orbea.
It was the Orbea, right? Oh, yeah, it was, wasn't it? This bike, and you were like, you were watching me coming down, trying to go, your bike's not making any noise. And it's like, it's really quiet.
I had bike envy, it's true.
Yeah, you totally had. And the thing is, and the other thing that I really liked about it is that because the stem length works perfectly with the chainstay length and the BB is really low on it,
Yeah.
you're really in the bike, I just feel really neutral on it. So I just feel like I can razz it and like I can, like both wheels drift at the same time. The bike picks up easy. And yeah, you do have to watch your pedaling, but it's got 155 mil crank. It's got really short cranks on it, so you've got clearance, right?
Yep.
But the BB is low.
Yep.
So I'm really happy they've got the geo adjuster on it. So I tried it in a high position, and I rode somewhere that was really steep, and I was like, oh man, I love the Works bike. I don't like this one. And then we flipped around you can flip the geo with just like a multi-tool.
Yep.
Flip that around, boom. Okay, now I'm in the right place on the bike.
Yeah,
so,
I like the fact they've got the shorter cranks.
Yeah, totally.
It makes a lot of sense, especially when you've got the Bosch motor, which needs the revs.
Exactly.
The only thing is, when the battery runs out, you can barely turn
just
the
throw
thing
in the
over.
bushes. It's like, yeah, you can't. You don't have the
no
leverage.
leverage.
You don't have the leverage, basically. But you know, that's what the range extender's for. And, and that gets us to the crux of the whole SL e-bike thing, right? Like, you're watching the clock, right? You're watching the battery tick away, right? You've got to be like really conscious of it. Whereas when I go out on a bike with 750 or an 800 watt hour battery, even a 700 watt hour battery, I don't think about it,
No.
right? Unless we're going on some Welsh 5 Valley adventure, then I'm thinking, okay, better not burn too much turbo because I'm going to be wasted at the end of the ride. SL e-bikes are still in that thing where I get range anxiety on them. So I'd actually like to see this bike come standard with the range extender.
Yeah, well, the top model does, right?
It does,
Yeah.
but I'd like to see this one come with it too, because then you'd have 650 watt hour battery, and you have a motor that can crank out 600 watts peak power. You're kind of in the full powery kind of zone and range.
If you can spin your legs, you got it, sort of thing.
Another thing I should say about this bike, it comes with carbon wheels.
Yep.
So you're getting a carbon frame, carbon wheels, good suspension. It's got the code brakes. You're running the SRAM GX Axis drivetrain. You've got a really good chainstay protector on it. The geo's dialed. I mean, it looks $1 million, right? It's a really good bike. And it's also, I mean, this is something I didn't mention some of the other bikes. Some of the brands scrimp on the saddles to save weight. They put like these, especially the Orbea's got this kind of quite skinny saddle on it. And like when you ride on an e-bike even if you're, I mean, when I did the range test, Danny, I think I must have done like 160K in 3 days or something like that. You feel it in your ass.
Well, you sit down a lot on an e-bike, don't you?
Exactly, exactly. And because you're going faster, there's more bump force coming through the seat. So like even that's cool. And the other thing with this is they've got their own dropper post. And on the size large, it goes from, I think it's 100, you can choose it to, you can adjust it from 170 mil of drop to 200. So what you literally do is you just screw this off, adjust it so that you have zero exposed post from the, and you need it on this bike because it's actually got like, I think it's a 450 seat tube. So it's not super short. There's some of the bikes in test got 430, but
the standover though is so low. Like
it is.
Bike
so it's just the tower that's supporting the seat post.
It's so easy to move around the bike.
I mean, I can't fault it really.
No.
Even the stock tires, the stock Maxxis tires are really good too.
Pretty much sounds perfect. So why is it not getting a 10?
Dan, you've no idea how much I sweated over these bloody ratings, right? There's the reason why it's not getting the 10 is one, I think it needs a range extender as standard. Maybe I'm just asking for too much at that price. But the key thing is that I hate the rattle from the Bosch SX motor.
Yeah.
I just hate it.
Yep.
Like the Specialized, like when you've been riding the Specialized and you get, or the TQ motor on the Trek, and they're like super quiet.
Or even the Fazua.
Yeah, they're super quiet, and you go on that clack, 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 and these bikes are designed for pedaling up fire roads, and then dropping in on really good trails, and then on all these really good, you're just accompanied by the motor doing the freewheel in the motor, clack, 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 clack. So
and when the rest of the bike is so silent, it really stands out.
Yeah. So to be a 10 bike, it needs a quiet motor.
So maybe it needs a new Bosch CX motor in it.
Danny, don't be letting the cat out of the bag.
So that wraps up our SL e-bike of the year test. Thank you very much for watching. Now, we don't know where the e-bike market is going, but we want to know what you think. Is it going to be all about power, all about weight? Let us know in the comments.
Bingo.